The Athena Institute for Advanced Studies was a place where the past and the future collided. Nestled on the outskirts of Athens, its sleek glass and steel structure stood in stark contrast to the ancient ruins that dotted the surrounding landscape. Inside, the hum of supercomputers and the faint glow of holographic displays filled the air, a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of knowledge. But tonight, the atmosphere was different, charged with an unspoken tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dr. Ilara Vasilis adjusted her lab coat and stared at the artifact resting on the examination table. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The Ether Codex, as they had come to call it, was a circular device about the size of a dinner plate, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and shimmer under the light. It had been discovered in a hidden chamber beneath the Institute, a chamber that shouldn't have existed according to the building's blueprints. "It's not just a relic," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the hum of the equipment. "It's a puzzle, and I'm going to solve it." Ilara was a woman of science, a skeptic through and through. She had spent her career decoding ancient texts, searching for the kernels of truth buried beneath layers of myth and superstition. To her, the gods of old were nothing more than stories, attempts by early humans to explain the unexplainable. But this was different. The codex radiated an energy that defied explanation, a faint hum that seemed to resonate with something deep within her. "Dr. Vasilis." A voice broke her concentration. She turned to see one of her assistants, a young man named Theo, standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide with unease. "What is it, Theo?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Ilara frowned. "At this hour? Who is it?" Before Theo could answer, a figure stepped into the room. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell in loose waves around his face. His eyes, a striking shade of gold, seemed to glow in the dim light. He wore a simple tunic and sandals, an odd choice for the modern world, but there was something about him that felt ancient. "Dr. Vasilis," he said, his voice smooth and melodic. "My name is Kairos. I believe you found something. That belongs to me." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" Kairos stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the codex. "That," he said, pointing to the artifact. "It's not just a relic, it's a key. And if you're not careful, it will unlock something far beyond your understanding." Ilara crossed her arms, her skepticism kicking into overdrive. "And who are you exactly? Some kind of treasure hunter?" Kairos smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I am a descendant of the Oracle of Delphi. The Codex is tied to my bloodline. Its power is not meant for mortal hands." Ilara scoffed. "The Oracle of Delphi? You expect me to believe that?" Before Kairos could respond, the room was suddenly bathed in a blinding light. The Codex began to vibrate, the symbols on its surface glowing with an otherworldly intensity. Ilara stumbled back, her heart racing as the air around her seemed to crackle with energy. "What's happening?" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening hum. Kairos's expression was grim. "You've activated it," he said. "And now, there's no turning back." The light grew brighter, filling the room until Ilara could see nothing else. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The codex fell silent, its surface once again dull and lifeless. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen force. Ilara's hands trembled as she reached for the codex. What did it do?" Kairos didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Ilara followed his gaze and felt her breath catch in her throat. The sky was alive. Storm clouds churned overhead, their shapes twisting and writhing like living things. Lightning arced across the sky, not in random bursts but in deliberate patterns as if guided by an unseen hand. And in the distance, she could see something else, a faint glow like the light of 1,000 stars rising from the ruins of the Parthenon. "The gods," Kairos whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "They're waking up." Ilara's mind raced, struggling to process what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of trick, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, she knew better. The Codex had done something that defied all logic, all reason. "What have I done?" she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Kairos turned to her, his golden eyes piercing. "You've opened a door," he said. "A door that was meant to stay closed. And now, we have to find a way to shut it before it's too late." Ilara stared at him, her skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. "And how do you propose we do that?" Kairos hesitated, his expression unreadable. "We start by understanding what the Codex truly is, and for that we'll need to go to the source." "The source?" "Mount Olympus," he said. "Where the gods once walked among mortals." Ilara's stomach churned. This was madness, and yet she couldn't deny the truth staring her in the face. The Codex was real. The gods were real, and if she didn't act quickly, the world as she knew it would be forever changed. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. No more secrets, no more riddles. You tell me everything you know." Kairos nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "Agreed. But be warned, Dr. Vasilis, the truth is not always what we want to hear." As they left the lab, the storm outside grew fiercer, the wind howling like a chorus of ancient voices. Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by humans, but by something far older, far more powerful. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, she realized that this was only the beginning. The storm outside the Athena Institute was unlike anything Ilara had ever seen. The wind howled like a chorus of ancient voices, and the rain fell in sheets, drenching the landscape in seconds. Lightning streaked across the sky in jagged patterns, illuminating the ruins of the Parthenon in the distance. The air crackled with energy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ilara and Kairos stood at the entrance of the Institute, their faces illuminated by the erratic flashes of light. Ilara clutched a waterproof satchel containing the ether, Codex, her fingers trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. Kairos, on the other hand, seemed eerily calm, his golden eyes scanning the horizon as if he could see something she couldn't. "We need to move," Kairos said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "This storm isn't natural. It's a warning." "A warning from who?" Ilara shouted over the wind. Kairos glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "From Zeus. He's testing us." Ilara's stomach churned. She still wasn't ready to accept that the gods were real, but the evidence was hard to ignore. The Codex, the storm, the way the air seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. It all pointed to something far beyond her understanding. "Fine," she said, tightening her grip on the satchel, "but we're not doing this blind. You said you'd tell me everything. Start talking." Kairos hesitated, his gaze flickering to the storm once more. "Not here. We need to get to safety first. Follow me." Without waiting for a response, he turned and began walking toward a narrow path that led away from the Institute. Ilara hesitated for a moment, then followed, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man, really? And why did he seem to know so much about the Codex? The path was treacherous, the rain-slicked stones making every step a challenge. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Ilara could feel the weight of the Codex in her satchel, as if it were alive and pulsing with energy. "Kairos," she called out, struggling to keep up. "Where are we going?" "To the ruins of Delphi," he replied without looking back. "It's the only place where we can find answers." "Delphi? That's miles from here." "We don't have a choice," Kairos said, his voice firm. "The Codex has awakened the gods, and Delphi is the key to understanding how to control it." Ilara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The Codex was too powerful to leave unchecked, and if the gods were real, they needed to act quickly. Still, the thought of trekking through the storm to an ancient ruin filled her with dread. As they walked, the storm grew fiercer. Lightning struck the ground nearby, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Ilara flinched, her heart pounding in her chest. "This isn't just a storm," she muttered, more to herself than to Kairos. "It's alive." Kairos glanced back at her, his expression grim. "Zeus is the god of the sky. This storm is his doing. He's trying to stop us." "Why? What does he have to gain?" "The gods have been sealed away for centuries," Kairos explained. "The Codex was designed to keep them imprisoned, but now that it's been activated, the seal is weakening. Zeus wants to reclaim his dominion over the mortal world, and he'll do whatever it takes to ensure that happens." Ilara's mind raced. If what Kairos was saying was true, then the stakes were even higher than she had imagined. The Codex wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon, one that could either save or destroy humanity. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Why are you so invested in this? What's your stake in all of it?" Kairos stopped walking and turned to face her, his golden eyes piercing. "I told you before, the Codex is tied to my bloodline. I am a descendant of the Oracle of Delphi, and it's my duty to protect the balance between the mortal and divine." Ilara studied him, searching for any sign of deception. But there was something about the way he spoke, the intensity in his eyes, that made her believe him. "All right," she said finally, "but if we're going to do this, we need to trust each other. No more secrets." Kairos nodded. Agreed. They continued their journey in silence, the storm raging around them. The path grew steeper, the terrain more rugged, but Kairos moved with a confidence that suggested he had walked this way many times before. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the ruins of Delphi. The ancient site was eerily quiet, the storm seeming to part around it as if held at bay by an unseen force. The columns of the Temple of Apollo stood tall and imposing, their weathered surfaces glowing faintly in the dim light. "This is it," Kairos said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of the oracle." Ilara stepped forward, her eyes scanning the ruins. "What are we looking for?" "Answers," Kairos replied. "The oracle was the bridge between the mortal and divine. If anyone can help us understand the Codex, it's her." Ilara frowned. "But the oracle hasn't existed for centuries. How are we supposed to—" Before she could finish, a voice echoed through the ruins, soft and melodic, yet filled with an ancient power. "You seek answers, Dr. Vasilis?" Ilara spun around, her heart racing. Standing before her was a figure, cloaked in shimmering light, her features both familiar and otherworldly. It was the oracle, her eyes glowing with the same golden hue as Kairos's. Who are you?" Ilara stammered, her voice trembling. The oracle smiled, her expression serene. "I am the voice of Apollo, the guide of the lost. And you, Dr. Vasilis, are standing at the crossroads of destiny." Ilara's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. And yet, the presence before her was undeniable. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The oracle's gaze softened. "The Codex is not what you think it is. It was not created to harness the power of the gods, but to imprison them. And now the seal is breaking. If you do not act, the gods will return, and the world as you know it will be lost." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. "What do I need to do?" The oracle stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You must find the labyrinth of Knossos. Within its depths lies the key to controlling the Codex. But beware, the path is treacherous, and the gods will not make it easy for you." Before Ilara could respond, the oracle's form began to fade, her light dissolving into the air. "Wait!" Ilara called out, reaching for her. But it was too late. The oracle was gone, leaving only the faint echo of her voice. Kairos stepped forward, his expression grim. "We need to move. The labyrinth is our next destination." Ilara nodded, her mind still reeling from what she had just witnessed. The oracle's words echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the stakes they faced. As they left the ruins of Delphi, the storm began to subside, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moonlight. But Alara knew better than to think the danger had passed. The gods were awake and they were watching. The journey to the labyrinth of Knossos was fraught with tension. The storm had subsided, but the air remained heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alara and Kairos traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The oracle's words echoed in Alara's mind, a haunting reminder of the stakes they faced. The labyrinth was no ordinary maze. According to myth, it was a prison designed by the legendary craftsman Daedalus to contain the Minotaur, a monstrous creature born of divine wrath. But the oracle had hinted that the labyrinth held more than just ancient bones. It held the key to controlling the Ether Codex. As they approached the ruins of Knossos, the landscape shifted. The ground was cracked and barren, the air thick with the scent of decay. The entrance to the labyrinth loomed before them, a gaping maw of stone and shadow. "This is it," Kairos said, his voice low. "The labyrinth. Once we enter, there's no turning back." Alara tightened her grip on the satchel containing the codex. "Then let's not waste any time." They stepped inside, the darkness swallowing them whole. The walls of the labyrinth were ancient, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. The air was cold and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and metal. "Stay close," Kairos warned. "The labyrinth is alive. It will try to confuse us to lead us astray." Alara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always prided herself on her rationality, her ability to see the world as it was. But here, in the heart of the labyrinth, she felt that certainty slipping away. The path twisted and turned, the walls seeming to close in around them. Every step felt like a struggle, as if the labyrinth itself was resisting their progress. "Do you feel that?" Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. Kairos nodded. "The labyrinth is testing us. It's designed to break the will of those who enter." As they walked, the air grew heavier, the shadows deeper. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint rhythmic glow, as if the labyrinth was alive and watching. "We're being watched," Alara said, her voice trembling. Kairos glanced at her, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "The gods are always watching, but here in the labyrinth their presence is stronger." Suddenly the ground beneath them shifted, the stones groaning as the path ahead split into three. Each passageway looked identical, their ends disappearing into darkness. "Which way do we go?" Alara asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Kairos closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in concentration. After a moment, he pointed to the middle path. "This way, but be careful. The labyrinth will try to deceive us." They stepped into the middle passage, the walls closing in around them. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The faint glow of the walls seemed to pulse in time with Alara's heartbeat, a steady rhythmic thrum that filled her with a sense of dread. As they walked, the path began to twist and turn, the walls shifting and changing as if alive. The symbols, etched into the stone, seemed to writhe and shift, their shapes forming patterns that made Alara's head spin. "Kairos," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't think we're alone." Before he could respond, a low growl echoed through the passageway. The sound was deep and guttural, sending a shiver down Alara's spine. "Stay behind me," Kairos said, his voice firm. The growl grew louder, the sound reverberating through the stone walls. Alara's heart raced as a figure emerged from the shadows, a massive, hulking shape that moved with a predatory grace. It was the Minotaur. The creature was enormous, its body covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, animalistic light, and its breath came in ragged, guttural gasps. It stood on two legs, its massive horns curving upward like deadly weapons. Alara's breath caught in her throat. It's real." Kairos stepped forward, his golden eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Stay back. I'll handle this." The Minotaur roared, the sound shaking the walls of the labyrinth. It charged at them, its massive hooves pounding against the stone floor. Kairos raised his hands, his voice echoing through the passageway. By the power of Apollo, I command you to stand down." The Minotaur hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing as it regarded Kairos. For a moment, it seemed as if the creature would obey. But then, with a deafening roar, it charged again. Kairos moved with a speed and grace that defied human capability. He dodged the Minotaur's charge, his movements fluid and precise. He struck the creature with a burst of golden light, the force of the blow sending it stumbling backward. Ilara watched in awe, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Kairos was more than just a descendant of the Oracle. He was something else entirely. The Minotaur roared again, its eyes blazing with fury. It charged at Kairos, its massive horns aimed straight at his chest. Kairos raised his hands, his voice echoing through the passageway. "Enough!" A burst of golden light erupted from his hands, engulfing the Minotaur in a blinding flash. When the light faded, the creature was gone, its form dissolving into shadows. Ilara stared at Kairos, her heart pounding in her chest. "What? What are you?" Kairos turned to her, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "I am Apollo," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "The god of light, prophecy, and healing. My memories were suppressed to protect me from the other gods. But now, with the Codex's power, I am beginning to remember." Ilara's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Kairos, Apollo, had just defeated the Minotaur with a power that defied all logic. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kairos, Apollo, sighed, his expression softening. "I didn't know myself. Not fully. The gods sealed my memories to prevent me from being used as a weapon. But now, with the Codex's power, the seal is breaking." Ilara's mind raced, struggling to process what she had just learned. If Kairos was Apollo, then the stakes were even higher than she had imagined. The gods were real, and they were waking up. "We need to keep moving," Apollo said, his voice firm. "The labyrinth will not let us rest for long." Ilara nodded, her mind still reeling. She tightened her grip on the satchel containing the Codex and followed Apollo, deeper into the labyrinth. The path twisted and turned, the walls shifting and changing as if alive. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The faint glow of the walls seemed to pulse in time with Ilara's heartbeat, a steady rhythmic thrum that filled her with a sense of dread. As they walked, the labyrinth began to change. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier with each step. The symbols etched into the stone seemed to writhe and shift, their shapes forming patterns that made Ilara's head spin. "We're close," Apollo said, his voice low. "The heart of the labyrinth is just ahead." They rounded a corner and found themselves in a large circular chamber. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, their surfaces glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, its surface etched with the same symbols as the Codex. "This is it," Apollo said, his voice filled with awe. "The key to controlling the Codex." Ilara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She placed the Codex on the pedestal, the symbols on its surface glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. As the Codex connected with the pedestal, the chamber was bathed in a blinding light. The air crackled with energy, the walls of the labyrinth seeming to pulse with a rhythmic glow. Ilara's mind was flooded with images, visions of the gods, of their power and their wrath. She saw the creation of the Codex, the ancient cult that had sought to harness the power of the gods. She saw the gods' fury, their decision to seal themselves away from the mortal world. And then, she saw the truth. The Codex was not just a key. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine, a way for humanity to access the power of the gods without being consumed by it. As the light faded, Ilara found herself standing in the center of the chamber, the Codex glowing faintly in her hands. "We have what we need," Apollo said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "But the gods will not let us leave without a fight." Ilara nodded, her mind still reeling from the visions. "Then let's not waste any time," As they turned to leave, the walls of the labyrinth began to shift and change, the air growing heavier with each step. The faint glow of the wall seemed to pulse in time with Ilara's heartbeat, a steady, rhythmic thrum that filled her with a sense of dread. The journey back from the labyrinth was a blur. Ilara's mind was still reeling from the visions she had seen, the creation of the Codex, the god's fury, and the truth about its purpose. The Codex was not just a key, it was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. And now, with its power fully awakened, the stakes were higher than ever. Apollo, no longer just Kairos, led the way, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The air around him seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, a reminder of his divine nature. Ilara followed closely, the Codex clutched tightly in her hands. Its surface pulsed with a faint rhythmic glow, as if it were alive and aware of the role it was about to play. As they emerged from the labyrinth, the sky above was a swirling maelstrom of dark clouds and jagged lightning. The gods were no longer content to watch from the shadows. They were making their presence known. "We need to get to the Parthenon," Apollo said, his voice firm. "That's where the Codex's power is strongest. That's where we'll make our stand." Ilara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The Parthenon, the ancient temple dedicated to Athena, was the heart of Athens, a symbol of humanity's connection to the divine. It was the perfect place for the final confrontation. The journey to the Parthenon was fraught with tension. The streets of Athens were eerily empty, the city's inhabitants having fled in the face of the unnatural storm. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, as if the gods themselves were closing in. As they approached the Parthenon, the storm grew fiercer. Lightning struck the ground around them, sending showers of sparks into the air. The wind howled, like a chorus of ancient voices carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and ash. "They're here," Apollo said, his voice low. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as the gods descended from the storm. They were magnificent and terrifying, their forms shimmering with an otherworldly light. Zeus stood at the forefront, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare challenge us mortals?" Zeus's voice boomed, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "You, who have squandered the gifts we bestowed upon you?" Ilara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "We don't want to challenge you. We want to coexist. The Codex is a bridge, not a weapon. It can allow us to live in harmony." Zeus's eyes narrowed. "Harmony. You who have defiled the natural order? You who have awakened forces beyond your comprehension?" Apollo stepped forward, his golden eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Father, listen to her. Humanity has evolved. They no longer need us to guide them, but they can still learn from us. The Codex can be a tool for understanding, not domination." Zeus's expression softened for a moment, but then his eyes hardened. "You have always been too soft, Apollo, too willing to see the good in mortals. But I have seen their greed, their arrogance. They are unworthy of our gifts." Ilara's mind raced. She needed to find a way to convince Zeus, to prove that humanity was capable of change. She thought back to the vision she had seen in the labyrinth, to the truth about the Codex. "Zeus," she said, her voice filled with quiet intensity, "the Codex was created to imprison you, to seal you away from the mortal world. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a bridge, a way for us to coexist, but only if you let it." Zeus's eyes narrowed. "And why should I trust you, mortal? What proof do you have that humanity is worthy of such a gift?" Ilara took a deep breath. "Because of curiosity. It's what drives us, what pushes us to explore, to learn, to grow. It's what brought us here, to this moment, and it's what will guide us forward." For a moment, there was silence. The storm seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. Then Zeus's expression softened and he nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "We will retreat to our realm. But know this, mortal. If you prove unworthy, we will return, and next time, there will be no mercy." As the gods began to fade, Athena stepped forward, her eyes filled with quiet intensity. "The Codex is not the only bridge," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are others, and not all of them are benevolent." And then they were gone. The storm began to subside, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moonlight. The air grew lighter, the oppressive energy fading away. Ilara and Apollo stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. "It's over," Ilara said, her voice filled with quiet awe. Apollo nodded, his expression softening. "For now, but the gods will be watching, and we must be ready." Ilara tightened her grip on the Codex, her mind racing with the implications of Athena's warning. The Codex was not the only bridge. There were others, and not all of them were benevolent. As they left the Parthenon, the first rays of dawn began to break through the clouds. The city of Athens was slowly coming back to life, its inhabitants emerging from their homes to survey the damage. Ilara and Apollo made their way back to the Athena Institute, the Codex clutched tightly in their hands. They knew that their journey was far from over, that there were still mysteries to uncover, still threats to face, but for now they had won. The gods had retreated, and humanity had been given a second chance. As they entered the Institute, Ilara felt a sense of quiet determination settle over her. She had started this journey as a skeptic, determined to prove that the gods were nothing more than stories. But now she knew the truth, that science and myth were not opposites but two sides of the same coin. And as she placed the Codex in its secure vault, she knew that she would continue her research, not to disprove the gods, but to understand them.